Hello everyone, this is part 8 of What If Naruto Formed a New Team, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. You're wasting your time in Leaf, kid. You're from that clan, it's obvious from your abilities. You little monster, hold still. Haku's a Leaf ninja. No way he'd go to the Mist Village for something as stupid as that. This isn't over. Monster. Haku rolled over. Sunlight that had been flooding through the window had tattooed crimson on his eyelids. His hair was splayed messily over his face, tickling his nose. Without a sound, he blinked his eyes open and sat up slowly. Even in my dreams I'm restless. Haku had dreamed of his father, for the first time in a long time, who he recalled few fond memories of. He used to think he had resented his father for being so cruel and unforgiving to him and his mother, as well as trying to kill them, until he remembered that he had been the one to end his father's life. I didn't mean to. He was not himself. He didn't like death, or the fact that he was fully capable of K so easily thanks to his Kekkei Genkai. It seemed like he couldn't escape it. The guilt he felt for K, his own father, out of pure desperation still stung after all this time. Haku had vowed that it would never happen again. Haku absently groped around next to him for a hair tie, finding one, and proceeded to pull his silky black tresses into a ponytail. His dark eyes were glued to the blank wall ahead of him while he swam through the last of his mottled dreams. Why do I have to have the Hyoten? Why can't I just be normal like everyone else? I hate this. I hate that my parents are gone and I'm the reason for it. He turned when he heard Naruto mumble something indecipherable in his sleep. It was something joyful, ramen maybe. Haku smiled. The blonde's face was obscured by the blanket draped over him, but he was sure the boy was grinning. Next to Naruto, Gaara was also fast asleep, snoring gently. It didn't look comfortable, sleeping straight on his back like that, but Gaara still appeared peaceful. His fear of the Shukaku had diminished since Jiraiya and the Third's intervention, but there were still some nights Gaara had restless sleep. The day's excitement had tired him out and allowed him to sleep deeply. Only recently had Haku been told that his best friends were both Jinchuriki, and he still hadn't thought about it much. This was because nothing had really changed after he had found out. They were still Naruto and Gaara, his friends who had become closer than brothers, and he was sure they always would be. After Haku had left his homeland, they were the only family he knew. Haku also felt a swell of pride rather than fear, knowing that they were demon containers. Their S for holding the Kyuubi and the Ichibi keeps people safe every day from a demon's unrestrained wrath, not just in Konoha but in any village. He couldn't see why people were so fearful of Naruto and Gaara back in Leaf. It hardly seemed rational. They had never done a thing to warrant ill will from anyone. If anything, they should have been treated like heroes for devoting their lives to their village. That was his opinion, at least. Haku pushed aside his blanket and let himself stretch, listening to his shoulders crack. It doesn't matter to me if they jail demons or not. We're friends and nothing can change that. Just as Haku was about to further observe the depths of his loyalty to Naruto and Gaara, the blonde boy sat up, still asleep, but looked as if he were reaching for something. As abruptly as he had shifted, Naruto was horizontal again, snoring and mumbling, "NMM, are you gonna?" Haku kept watching, amused that Naruto's dreams could even touch the physical world. Eat that, MNF, fish cake. He's already hungry and he's not even conscious. Haku noted, flinching when Naruto rolled over again, a flimsy hand striking Gaara right in the face, who miraculously slept right through the sleepy assault. Maybe I should go fix breakfast before he eats Gaara-kun's gourd. Gracefully rising to his feet, Haku stepped lightly over to the pile of travel gear in the corner of the guest room. He unceremoniously dove into a larger bag and riffled around in search of clothing. He had slept in his pants, so he pulled on the plain, white GI he had extracted and then quietly exited the room. Naruto and Gaara's snores followed after him as he closed the door. The rest of the house was silent compared to the room Haku had slept the night in. He continued to blink the sleep out of his eyes as he went down the flight of stairs and turned right to where he had recalled the kitchen to be. Not to his surprise, Tsunami was already there, setting a frying pan on the stove. Haku cleared his tea innocently and she turned to him, smiling. "Oh, good morning, Haku-kun. Did you sleep well?" He nodded. "Yes, I did. Thank you for letting us stay here, Tsunami-san." "Not at all, it's my pleasure." She waved him off, cracking an egg expertly and opening it over the pan with a sizzle. "Have your friends woken up yet?" "Not yet," Haku answered. "Would you mind if I helped you?" Tsunami smiled. "No, over in that cabinet there are some bowls. If you can set them on the table, please." He moved to the shelf she had pointed to and discovered a good number of ceramic bowls stacked on top of one another. Haku vaguely felt nostalgia for the morning routine of his childhood, which was spent with his mother preparing meals and cleaning. He knew that his mother was long-s, but the memory made his heart a bit lighter. After aiding Tsunami in preparing the morning meal, Haku returned to the guest room where, predictably, Naruto and Gaara were still sleeping. With a sigh, Haku pulled the blanket away from Naruto, who shifted in his sleep but did not wake. Gaara-kun. His red-haired friend wasn't as difficult to revive as Naruto was. Upon hearing his name, his eyes snapped open and he sat up groggily. He flashed a look of slight annoyance at Haku. While Gaara fought his way back to consciousness, Haku called to Naruto several times and even shook him roughly by the shoulders. He had to admit, Naruto could probably sleep through a train wreck soundly if left undisturbed. He was just so deeply asleep. But, Haku thought to himself, his mind does have more developed areas of interest. "Naruto-kun, the ramen will get cold if you don't hurry." "Ah." The blonde leapt up, clear over Haku's head. "Wait for me." He ran out of the room, partly awake at the most, and the dark-haired boy listened in slight amusement to the thundering sounds as Naruto half ran, half fell down the stairs, following the delicious aroma that hung in the air. Haku didn't bother to hide his wide smirk as Gaara continued to laze about and yawn. Naruto was unique in the sense that whatever he deemed to be important, whether it be friends or food, would be something he would give his best effort to. Well, maybe friends more than noodles. "Don't rile him up," Gaara stood, scratching his chin. "He'll scare the people who live here." He moved to lift his gourd with only one arm. "He's getting stronger." Haku noted in wonderment, and then turned to leave the room without a second glance. "Only with his appy," Haku replied and promptly followed after Gaara. Downstairs, Gaara and Haku joined Naruto at the table. The latter looked suspiciously bruised. He grinned at Haku. "Thanks for waking me, Haku-kun. I got down here just in time." "Don't mention it." The dark-haired boy sat down across from him. "I wasn't really serious before." Even though he had only made up an excuse to rouse the QB container, Naruto was still grateful to wake up to a bowl of miso, as was Gaara, but with less enthusiasm. Tsunami was busy scrubbing down the frying pan she had been cooking with earlier, humming merrily to herself. Gaara kept his eyes half-lidded and poured himself some tea. Haku noticed this sulky behavior. "Gaara-kun seems a bit off this morning." After setting the kettle down, the redhead lifted his cup and took a slow sip. Naruto's cheerful slurping of noodles was disgustingly audible all the while. Haku frowned to himself, still watching as Gaara drank with his dark-rimmed eyes closed. He looked sallow and kind of clammy. Was he sick? The red-haired boy looked up and couldn't help but notice Haku's oddly perceptive stare aimed at his head. "What?" Haku's frown deepened thoughtfully. "What's with everyone today?" "Eat something, Haku-kun," Naruto said between two very loud slurps. It came out almost like an order. Haku poured himself some tea, not looking at Gaara, who was once again irritable and uncommunicative. Haku glanced at Naruto instead. Was he telling him to eat because he just happened to be underweight for someone his age and height? Or was he giving fair warning before he plowed through the remaining dishes set on the table? He guessed it was a bit of both. Tsunami was still humming. The tuneless noise was beginning to annoy Haku. Gaara finally raised his chopsticks to his mouth, muttering, "Itadakimasu," and still kept his gaze down. "Seriously, I can't understand what's with them today." Haku was still frustrated. "Hey, where did Anko-sensei go off to?" Naruto asked only because his bowl was empty. "Did she eat breakfast already?" Tsunami turned to him. "Your sensei left with my father early this morning to help him buy supplies, and something about finding Dango. They'll be back later. She really is a very nice lady." Gaara scoffed at the word, niece. Anko didn't seem so nice as much as she did clinically insane. She was more inclined to forge onward into dangerous territory than most instructors. Oh yes, and they would have to fix Jiraiya's peeping problem, because he wasn't sure how much longer they could last under Anko's guidance. Naruto took a bite of egg and Haku watched as the white, pointy incisors came down in full efficiency. Since when do I watch people eat? Since when do I watch Naruto eat? Do I want to make myself sick? Gaara gave a half-hearted glance of concern to Haku, who seemed to be silently retching across the table from him. I'm not even going to ask. Naruto, however, was a bit concerned. Whoa, Haku-kun, are you alright? You need something to drink. Haku's struggle seemed to slow a bit. Are you choking? Naruto pointed a finger at Gaara next to him. Gaara-kun can use CPR, so I know you'll be okay. Gaara gave a heated glare to Naruto. Curiously enough, he had learned how to perform CPR, but he wasn't keen to use it right now. You shouldn't assume such things, Gaara said curtly, taking a slurp of ramen and making Naruto feel slightly flustered. After a moment, Haku stilled and seemed to be breathing regularly. You never know, Naruto thought to himself. The dark-haired boy's shoulders were slumped, his knuckles were white as he gripped his teacup fiercely. Naruto and Gaara kept eating, warily. Haku-kun looks like he's gonna explode. Tsunami was still humming. How can you be so normal about it? Haku finally snapped, quite loudly. His friends paused in their munching and looked at him quizzically. Abruptly, Tsunami's humming stopped. Finally, normal about what? Gaara said coolly, thinking if Haku was troubled that the S was about to hit the fan. About that Nukanen. Zabuza. Haku hissed, lowering his voice so Tsunami wouldn't be subjected to their petty ninja affairs. How can you be so relaxed? He's still out there. Looking for, he paused, noticing Tsunami's wandering ear. You need to chill out, Haku-kun, Naruto said quietly, the no-eyebrow clown. Yeah, we know he's around here somewhere. But you can't freak out in front of his family. I mean, we're still on a mission. But, no, Gaara interrupted, you're only nervous because he has a thorough knowledge of your abilities, which is understandable. He paused, but you must stay in control of your emotions. We can't afford to have you distracted if things take a bad turn. Tsunami's gaze was suspiciously focused on the window above the sink where she was still washing cooking utensils. We can't talk about this here. Naruto finished the rice ball he had been eating with one swift chomp. Hey, why don't we go out and train for a while? Just to calm our nerves. Haku nodded and was starting to visibly relax. I agree. Haku and Naruto rose from their seats, but Gaara didn't move, not yet. Why? Haku didn't want to sound indignant, but it was difficult. Even Naruto was clearly abashed that Gaara could somehow stomp and spit on his good ideas. The redhead gave an almost imperceptible shrug. You haven't eaten anything, Haku-kun. Naruto's offense evaporated. He has a point. Haku took his seat again, a grateful smile on his face. All right. They left shortly after collecting their weapons. It was warm outside and the three genin seemed slightly nervous thanks to Haku's earlier rant, but it was too beautiful a day not to relax. They settled for an empty beach beyond one of the docks nearby the house. There was a breeze coming off of the bay. It was high tide, Haku also noticed. This is great. Naruto fell back onto the sand and gazed at the sky above. It was the same color as his eyes. Gaara dropped his gourd, which fell to the ground with no perceptible sound, and he kneeled down beside the blonde, running his hand over the beach sand. It was different than the grains native to Suna, and he noted that he would be one of the few people who could tell them at all. It was cooler, by far. Water washing in and out over it constantly gave it a different texture, less smooth than the fine, wind-blown sand of his homeland. Even the smell was unique. Here it was the ocean, and it was nice, but in Suna it was the open sky, and that was best smell there was. To him at least. Gaara sat silently, creating amorphous shapes with the grains while Naruto rambled on about something to Haku, who was watching the calm water rush off and onto shore. Hey Haku-kun, how does that crazy mist guy know you anyway? Naruto couldn't help but wonder. This question was also on Gaara's mind. Haku half turned to them, still standing near the water's edge. Well, I guess there's a story I have to tell you then. Naruto sat up, listening as intently as Gaara was. When I was young, I lived with my parents on a farm. We were happy, I guess. Things were simple. He looked away from him. It was early spring. There was still snow on the ground when I discovered the Hyoten. How? Naruto prompted, you were like 5, right? How could you use it if you were so little? I don't know. It just happened. One day I could do these things, Haku said quietly. My mother knew because she had it as well. She was once part of a clan. When my father found out, he thought we were monsters. The dark-haired boy glanced back at him. He K her first. I watched him do it, and I couldn't stop him. When he came after me, I just. Gaara and Naruto were silent. I don't know how I did it really, but once they were I knew I couldn't stay. Where did you go? Gaara asked. His voice was low, somewhat angry. Nowhere, he said simply. It was freezing, I remember. There was a bridge outside of town and that's where I saw him. And the guy saw you but he didn't do anything. Naruto prompted, up to speed. No, he left. I'm not surprised, it wouldn't be in his character to care about another human being. Haku's voice was particularly icy, but after that I met Hiroshi and then. Us. Naruto finished and nodded to himself as if that explained everything. Sadly it did. Odd how he can still recall you if you really held no interest to him. Gaara speculated. Yes, I'm not so sure about that myself, Haku mumbled, turning back to stare at the water. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. It was just painful to talk about. No sweat, we're even now. Naruto soothed. You know how me and Gaara-kun are super cool, Jinchuriki? Gaara rolled his eyes. And we know about, well, your mom and dad. Haku nodded, not quite sure what to say. So he said nothing, following his better judgment, and walked out onto the water, focusing his chakra to his feet without really thinking about it. He's sad, Naruto said quietly. I wish there was something we could do to, get his mind off of it. There's nothing we can do now. Gaara answered, sand drifting dreamily around him in circles. Fair. Naruto stood, brushing himself off. He was aggravated that Haku, one of the most emotionally stable people he knew, was still unable to come to terms with his past. Not that he blamed him. It wasn't every day a missing nin shows up and tells you that there are others like you somewhere out there. Something occurred to Naruto as he watched sand drift around the redhead in slow, calculating coils and he frowned. Let's train. I'm bored. Gaara looked up at him impassively, not very interested. Haku most often tested his defenses, and when it came to sparring against Naruto, the boy usually made such a raucous Gaara would purposely end the fight just to not have to listen to his jabbering. He also knew that wasn't very fair, but it bothered his conscience little. The blonde couldn't help but be spiteful. There was sand everywhere. It was an open invitation and apparently Gaara wasn't taking him seriously. Get up off your you bastard, we should really work on your taijutsu, Naruto smirked, seeing the redhead scowl. I mean all you do is stand around and let your sand protect you. But I'm pretty sure one day you'll run into someone who can get past that shield of yours. Unlikely. Well, it'd still be useful, Naruto went on. What? You're too lazy to improve your speed and stamina. Now that I think about it, you are kind of clumsy. Have you looked in a mirror recently? Hey, at least I can throw a punch. Naruto barked, flexing a muscle, which is more than you can say. The sand hovering around Gaara dropped down. That was the last straw. He didn't have to prove anything to anyone, most especially Naruto. Gaara stood, almost mechanically, and gave Naruto his attention. The blonde was pleased. I guess that got him. In truth, Naruto had never actually seen Gaara fight in close quarters combat. Ever. So it was an understatement to say he was completely shocked as the red-haired boy shifted into a textbook perfect offensive stance and beckoned him to come at him with a flat-palmed hand. The nerve. The absolute nerve. Naruto balled his fists and leaped, not sure how to attack Gaara because it was astounding to see that sand didn't race up to shield him once Gaara caught Naruto's punch, and forced him back with a flick of his wrist. Still, the sun-bleached grains quivered beneath Gaara's feet as he restrained it with chakra, yearning to come to his aid. Okay. Good. You're not totally pathetic. Naruto had only said it to provoke him, and was successful. No cheating with sand. Got it. Gaara said nothing and only lunged forward. Naruto was taken aback by his burst of speed. Leaning back, he avoided a jab that was quickly followed by an L, grazing his left shoulder. Naruto let Gaara drive him back. His feet skidding in the sand, grit and shells were sent flying. It was odd but surprisingly well matched. Dodge a swipe at the face, that would have hurt you bastard. Throw a few punches, block a few, Naruto wasn't trying hard and it was a mistake. Wham! Gaara smirked, picture-perfect hit on the solar plexus and Naruto stumbled backwards, grinning maniacally. When did Gaara get this quick? His stomach nerves were screaming but Naruto moved faster, forcing chakra into his feet for speed as Haku had once suggested. Naruto's first 2 blows connected with Gaara's shoulder and rib cage, the third he blocked. Darn. Improvise. Naruto smirked as he followed through with his punch and predictably Gaara caught it. He cursed himself as he was nailed by a brutal roundhouse kick in the side. He tumbled down, sand around him writhing and swept Naruto's legs out from under him. The blonde made a yelping noise and righted himself on outstretched hands. Gaara regained his footing and continued with another volley of punches. He isn't as fast as Haku-kun, but he's way stronger. Naruto could already feel himself begin to bruise. Maybe Ero-sensei can give us some formal training or something. This is awesome. 2 hours later they were seated on the beach, sweaty and bruised and out of breath. Naruto sported a black eye that made him resemble his sparring partner somewhat. Gaara wouldn't admit it, but Naruto had the upper hand. He was more experienced, better with improvisation and hit hard consistently. He was sure he had beaten the blonde well enough to get his point across. He could throw a punch. He just chose not to. Was that a problem? Haku all the while had been absently utilizing his Kekkei Genkai while his friends fought. Water had been sent streaking through the air, creating dozens of shapes and a number of different variations of clones. For a half hour he had been fiddling with one shape in particular. He had formed a simple rectangular sheet of ice with a very generous amount of chakra. He had been compressing the surface, making it smoother, flatter, and thinner as his teammates' battle cries rang out over the beach. He was surprised no one had stopped by to investigate them yet, but appreciated the privacy all the same. I'll give it a bit more chakra, he estimated, forcing it into his basic ice sculpture and began to refine it, purifying it of sand, salt and minerals. It couldn't have been more than 1/4 of an inch thick when the once bluish, translucent ice became glass-like and reflected the sun's light brilliantly. A mirror. It was perfect, a sheet of ice in the summer. Maybe he'd use a bit less chakra next time. Haku observed himself in his creation. It was magnificent. He felt it too, as if his chakra control was truly balanced as he gazed into it, wondering what the resonance could mean. It would be useful for distracting enemies and quite possibly a good. What are you doing, Haku-kun? Haku leapt in surprise. He felt his stomach fly up into where he thought his brain should be and his chakra fluctuated drastically. He was startled and he felt some part of him being compressed as he fell forward, expecting to S into the mirror but he seemed to melt into it. Naruto watched as Haku dove into the mirror and disappeared. Naruto, horrified, fell backwards, abandoning any chakra control that his feet had on the water's surface and crashed into the salty waves. Seagulls screamed in laughter overhead. The blonde forced his head above water, gulping air. What the hell just happened? He stared at the mirror hanging suspended in the air. Haku had been there a second ago and just vanished from sight. Naruto gaped as Haku's image shone perfectly clear in the mirror, as if he was still standing in front of it. This is one retarded jutsu or a magic trick. Naruto-kun. Haku was speaking, or was it the mirror? Naruto's brain was beginning to hurt as he treaded the deep water. Even more puzzling was that Haku emerged from the ice mirror, stepping out of it casually and back onto the surface of the water where Naruto stared at him in wonderment. How'd you do that? Haku was mystified. He hadn't exactly tried to walk into a mirror before. That sounded like some ridiculous carnival trick. But this was real. When he felt it, it wasn't like ice to him at all. It was water, allowing him passage, and once he was inside, it was a wide plain, where he had a large view of his surroundings from a separate dimension. Even if it appeared outwardly thin and impenetrable, it was almost like walking into a room. How he did it was another matter. I don't know. Confused, wet and annoyed, Naruto regained his chakra control and trudged back to shore with his clothes sopping wet. Gaara watched from the beach as Naruto returned and Haku moved into the mirror again inquisitively, wanting to investigate. Well, that's new. Naruto was grumbling to himself as his feet reached the sand again, and he wasted no time in tugging his saturated, orange jacket over his head and tossing it at Gaara, who snickered at him when he missed by a few feet. Damn, the wind's blowing the opposite way. His tea stuck to his C with a smacking noise as he clawed at it, still muttering ill-naturedly. Next time he'd make sure he'd warn Haku that he was visiting when he wanted to investigate his progress. Geez, he's paranoid. I wish I wasn't always on the receiving end of his panic attacks. Haku-kun's new ability looks interesting. Gaara mused, not hiding his smirk. Yeah, well, you wouldn't think that if you were the one who went out there to check on him. Naruto snapped, reduced to his dark green boxes. Haku-kun is way too jumpy. The blonde sprawled out on the warm sand, ignoring Gaara's mirth at his lack of clothing. After watching Haku experiment with his new Kekkei Genkai ability for nearly an hour, Naruto and Gaara were beginning to bore. The redhead had suggested that they continue to pass time sparring, but Naruto loudly objected due to his partial nudity and the wounding of what was left of his fragile pride. So they sat and gazed out onto the water. The thin strips of cloud above that were far too emaciated to provide any real sun cover. Hey, maybe Gaara-kun will finally get a tan. For a good while Haku had been darting between now two ice mirrors, which Gaara supposed had consumed a good amount of chakra to create. Every moment he increased his speed until he was an indistinct flash. Haku-kun's ice doohickeys are pretty cool, but they don't look very useful. Naruto commented dryly and Gaara grunted. Maybe it was a noise of agreement, but it came out indifferent. The Kyuubi container had been building a blob that was first intended to be a sand castle on top of his stomach, covering the majority of his seal. Small splinters of driftwood acted as tiny flagpoles and gates, with pearly fragments of seashell placed haphazardly for windows. The color kinda reminds me of Hinata-chan's eyes. Hey, Gaara-kun. What do ya suppose Hinata-chan is doing right now? Gaara blinked. He knew his friend to often have sporadic thoughts, but this was unusual even for Naruto. Can't say. Really? The redhead gave Naruto a look of slight incredulity. Well, like any upstanding Kunoichi such as herself, she'd be with her team, actively participating in missions in service to Konoha. Naruto stared dreamily at his sand blob. Use your imagination. By upstanding Kunoichi do you mean Sakura-chan as well? Drop it. His voice was snippish. Ha. Okay. They hadn't noticed Haku had finished with his Hyoten creations until he stood in front of them looking very relaxed. His smile was a good sign. Maybe he had improved his mood. Done, Haku-kun. Naruto was destructing his doomed castle, but saved a few of the nicer shells. Nearly. The dark-haired boy glanced at Naruto's clothes, still a bit wet even after laying in the bright sun for 45 minutes straight. They were placed in an ordered line: jacket, shirt, holsters, pants, but he was still wearing his forehead protector out of habit. With little effort Haku raised his hand and with a short dose of chakra and extracted the last of the salt water for his friend. Just to show off he compiled it into a hovering, transparent sphere. You could have done that earlier, Gaara pointed out blandly. I'd rather he keep his shirt on. It was his first opportunity to throw one of Naruto's comments back at him. Haku nodded, grinning openly as Naruto scowled at the redhead for pitting his own joke against him. Around noon they returned to their lodging. As expected, Anko and Tazuna had also come back from their early morning shopping trip and were seated at the kitchen table, which was decorated with a fair selection of seafood. Back so soon, huh, boys? Anko smirked. It appeared as though she and their client had already begun eating. I figured you would have taken longer, so we started lunch without you. How kind, Haku said softly. Tazuna raised an eyebrow while Naruto and Gaara snickered. Come in and sit down, boys. Tsunami appeared to be preparing dinner already. There's plenty left. Where is Inari? Gaara asked, supposing the boy was sulking. He and I already ate, Tsunami answered. I think he's upstairs playing. The genin sat down and Naruto was first to help himself. Thanks. This looks great. Haku's eyes wandered to a framed picture on the wall. In it he saw a younger Inari with his mother and grandfather beside him smiling, and above them a piece of the photograph had been torn away, leaving the top right corner frayed. Excuse me, Haku couldn't help his curiosity. That picture there, it seems that a part of it has been torn out. Tazuna paused in his chewing and furrowed his brow, drawing attention to himself. After a short silence he spoke nostalgically. The person taken from the picture is Kaiser, Inari's father. Tsunami also paused in her supper preparations. My husband. Haku looked slightly alarmed that he had touched such a delicate subject. It's all right, Tazuna rasped, and took a sip of tea. That man was once a hero here. A hero? Naruto's eyes widened in interest. The old man nodded, preparing to narrate a story. Yes. He brought the meaning of courage back to our village a few years ago, before he. Hey, I see you're awake. A cheerful voice helped Inari get a grip on consciousness. How are you feeling? The young boy sat up and rubbed his eyes. There was a man in front of him. Earlier, he felt his heart tear out of his sea after those rotten boys had taken his young puppy and thrown it into the lagoon to drown. But he was certain he was S2 as he, an 8-year-old with no swimming experience, was pushed in after the puppy. Somehow Pocky figured out how to swim in a mere 30 seconds and paddled along to shore. After a few minutes of flailing, Inari was still about to drown as the guilty kids ran off to let his terrified screams unheard. Or so he thought. You saved me, Inari asked, needing to confirm it. Yeah, the tall man smiled, but first eat. He gestured to 2 skewered fish cooking over an open fire, then we can talk about it. The fish were tasty. I had a talk with those boys, Kaiser assured him, they won't be causing you trouble anymore. I just wish I knew where Pocky went. Inari mumbled solemnly. Kaiser scratched his chin. In the country where I come from dogs are very loyal to their masters. He paused, though you did kind of abandon him first, you know. I wanted to save Pocky, really, the boy protested weakly, but I couldn't do it. Hey, you have to be strong. If you care about something, protect it. With both arms, Kaiser displayed his own scarred arms. You should never hesitate to put your life on the line for the things dear to you. Well, I guess so. Inari agreed, a small smile dawning on his round face. Kaiser ruffled the boy's hair. Now that's the spirit. After that, the two were inseparable. Tazuna stared down at his sushi. Inari never knew his real father, so Kaiser became a father figure for him, and a part of our family. Why was he a hero? Naruto prompted. If we don't get this gate closed, the entire lower district will be flooded. A man cried despondently to his companions as their ponchos flapped wildly in the wind. A fierce storm had rained down on the village for days on end, overwhelming the levees and flooding many of the waterways. A group of people were huddled together in a tight group, staring down the embankment as the rising water level threatened the survival of their village. If we can get this rope secured around one of the gate posts, we can pull it closed from here. One suggested, voice straining against the screaming wind and rain. You're crazy. Someone would have to swim out there to do it. There was a silence among them as they stood in the howling wind. It was a fool's errand. I'll do it, Kaiser volunteered. All heads turned back to face him as he removed his hat, appearing surprisingly calm. Kaiser was a well-respected man in the community, known for his solid beliefs and courageous heart. A man handed him a rope without a word, unwilling to protest his generous offer. Kaiser took it and moved ahead, preparing himself for the shock of cold water that he was about to leap into. Dad, don't go, Inari yelled, knocking people aside and clinging to his father's soaked shirt. Kaiser smiled down at him. It's all right, Inari. This village is important. It's our home. Remember, if you care about something you must protect it, right? He sniffled pathetically for a moment, but then raised his eyes, with both arms. That's my boy. Kaiser was elated by his reply and patted his head affectionately. I'll be right back. No worries. Before Inari could protest again, his father dove into the water. He saved the village that day, Tazuna said quietly. He was a hero. Brave. Anko offered a word before sipping her tea. What happened to him? Haku asked. Behind them, Tsunami began to chop onions more ferociously. Gato arrived a short time later and took control of our village, the old man continued. Kaiser resisted him even after several warnings and threats from his thugs. One day Gato took it too far. The genin wore questioning looks. They hadn't touched their food. He was M.K. in front of the entire village as a warning to not interfere. Tazuna's voice was a low growl and Tsunami restrained a sob. He was beaten and tied up for believing in freedom and K for Gato's own selfish gain. K in front of Inari. Coward. Anko supplied another word, this time describing the shipping magnate. The village's courage with him and Inari has never been the same since. Tazuna finished. The only way I can truly avenge Kaiser is to build this bridge and restore hope to the land of waves. It was quiet for a while. We'll make sure you finish that bridge, old man. Naruto vowed. For the remainder of the day Haku insisted that they train. He worked in quiet solitude out on the water and refined his new ability while Gaara and Naruto continued the clumsy rounds of close-quarters combat. They each contemplated the death of Kaiser. It was painful to think that a family suffered nearly as much as they had, and it was difficult to admit that the outcome of their mission looked bleak with Momoki Zabuza looming in the future. Dinner was more cheerful, mostly revolving around a series of jokes both Naruto and Anko had been telling. Inari, as always, was silent and moody, and they made it a point not to touch on the subject as to why. As he often did, Gaara retired to sleep first, followed shortly by a yawning Haku. Naruto, though battered from Gaara's fierce strikes due to their training, was not as tired as he should have been and lingered. It was a clear night. The air was thin and the breeze carried a salty smell. Naruto preferred the familiar rustic, leafy scent of Konoha. He slipped outside barefoot. Naruto stood on the cool hardwood deck and stared with unblinking eyes at the ocean of stars dotting the black sky. He turned after sensing a faint presence nearby. Inari sat silently with his hat tipped over his bowed head and his short legs dangling off the side of the porch. Without much thought, Naruto padded over to the young boy and took a seat next to him. Inari refused to look up, too stubborn to acknowledge his presence. He didn't like being ignored. With a light-hearted seriousness, Naruto removed the younger boy's hat in one swift motion, which left him amusingly startled, and replaced it on his own head. It's too small. The QB container mused to himself. Inari snatched his hat back with an air of annoyance and tugged it back on. Quit it, will ya? This is my favorite hat. It's kinda ugly, Naruto droned disinterestedly, still staring upwards, and Inari scowled at him. Go inside. You'll catch a cold if you stay out here, you know. I don't care. Your Gramps will care, Inari didn't respond, and your mom too. Just shut up, okay? I don't need some weirdo who thinks he's a ninja to tell me what to do. Apparently it hadn't been very hard for Naruto to get his attention. With the thick silence that ensued, Naruto lowered his eyes to the lazy waves crashing in slow motion ahead of them. The young boy was tense and angry, and it was radiating off of him. Naruto could feel it. How could someone that small give off so much resentment? One might think he would have spontaneously combusted by now. I heard about what happened to your dad, Naruto said without looking at Inari. The young boy's back stiffened and he didn't answer. You have it rough here and you're unhappy, Naruto went on when Inari didn't protest, but that doesn't mean you give up and let things stay like this. You don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I think I do. The blonde bit back mildly. So you think you're miserable? Then would you know what it's like to not even have a father to look up to? Or have your fellow villagers look at you like you're some kind of monster? I don't think so. There was a long silence before he began again. When I was little I had nothing. No family, no friends, and people turned their backs on me wherever I went. Naruto's voice was low. I met Haku-kun and Gaara-kun and they knew what it was like to have nothing, to have no one to depend on. We grew up together wanting to become ninja because the only way we could be respected is if we proved ourselves first, and life shouldn't have to be that way. Inari was finally looking at him. No matter how bad it gets, that doesn't mean you surrender. You have to try harder every time you fall down. He continued to watch the waves. I'll be the strongest shinobi in my village, the Hokage, and then everyone will see me. And you. He gave a serious look to the young boy. You've got to stand up for yourself and for your village, because we can't fight Gato for you. Even if you'll fighting for what you believe in. That's the only way I'll ever let myself But it won't make a difference. We'll all still be stuck here until he kills us all. Inari's voice shook. He has us trapped here. Stop being such a baby about it. What would your dad say? Naruto snapped. Sometimes you've got to fight for your freedom. As long as you don't let him, that's the one thing that Gato guy can never take away from you. My freedom. Yeah, believe it. The blonde nodded. It's okay to be scared, but that doesn't mean you run away from your problems. I bet your dad never did that, did he? No, but I just don't see what good I'll do. I'm just a kid and Gato's got a whole army. Inari looked taken aback when Naruto pulled out a kunai and held it out to him, wearing a convincing grin. With a quivering hand, Inari reached out and took it from him, gingerly grasping the cool, metal ring. Haku-kun once told me that it's not the weapon, but the force and spirit behind it that does the most damage. Naruto recalled a small bit of philosophy. Of course, that was after I kicked his butt during training. He smirked to himself. Inari nodded, taking the words to heart, and then stared at the knife in his hand for a long moment. Right. He wore a quizzical look. What do I do with this? Naruto shrugged, then yawned. Just practice with it. Try throwing it at Gaara-kun and see what happens. Inari looked floored as the blonde grinned mischievously. Now come on, let's get some sleep. It's freaking freezing out here. Sir, we're a few days behind schedule, but we can still finish laying the support beams by the end of tomorrow if the weather keeps up. A man wearing a blue helmet gave his report to Tazuna, who scratched his beard in thought. Good. Keep the pace up and we'll take a break for lunch in a few hours. Yes. Sir. What now? Well, it's just a rumor, but is there really a ninja trying to sabotage this bridge? Tazuna looked away from the paper he had been reading and gave a stern look to the young worker. You can go home now if you want. I won't stop you. Tazuna looked back down at his paper, but I'm not leaving. Come hell, high water, or I'll here if I must. The worker gave him a shaky nod before stumbling back to his duty. Tazuna heaved a sigh. He didn't blame his staff for being nervous. Ninja were all around bad news if they weren't on your side, but he couldn't afford to have his laborers abandon their posts now. Besides, he still had his faithful bodyguards nearby. They seemed more inclined to chat rather than act as surveillance apparently. So then Haku-kun just jumps right into his mirror thingy and disappears. Naruto was retelling the tale of how Haku uncovered his new Kekkei Genkai ability the day before. Can you believe it, Anko-sensei? She nodded. Yeah. Naruto, are you sure you didn't hit your head or something last night? Positive. I wasn't dreaming, really. Haku did get into that mirror. I saw him do it. Anko nodded again while Naruto did his best to convince her it was not a figment of his imagination. Haku said nothing, not really wanting to expose his new ability so early on. I thought I could at least keep it a secret until we got back home. Why must Naruto-kun always talk about these things? I'm just curious about something. Anko had to ask, does Gaara sleep in often? They had left the redhead behind after he had failed to wake up at the designated time. Naruto wisely suggested that they let him get his sleep because waking him too early could result in loss of one's life and/or limb. He'll catch up when he's ready. Haku said simply. Anko shrugged. Idiots. Gaara disliked being left behind. He slung his gourd onto his back and burst out the bedroom door with an audible bang. His heavy footfalls alerted Tsunami to his presence before his scowling face appeared in the doorway. Good morning, Gaara-kun. How did you sleep? She was awfully cheerful and it made him even more irritable. There's a missing nin after Tazuna and they leave me behind. What logic possessed them? Fools. Gaara glared at the clock hanging on the wall above Tsunami's head and she was clearly unnerved by his icy stare. Where are they? He didn't mean to frighten her, but he was too grumpy to be polite at that point. Your teammates and my father left for the bridge nearly a half hour ago, she answered, desperately trying to compose herself. Would you like some breakfast? He was already out the door. Mist rolled in over the bay, gradually enveloping the bridge from bottom to top. The poor visibility discouraged a good number of the workers who had hoped for clear skies. It didn't take very long before Anko and the two present genin grew suspicious. It had been a perfectly clear day and the newly formed haze was sure to make their mission to protect the bridge builder more difficult. Haku reacted the most strongly of the three waiting shinobi, sensing the unnatural, minuscule elements of chakra interwoven with the water vapor more quickly than even Anko had. He was more attuned to this development, and his voice held a tangible edge of controlled terror. He's here. There were sudden cries from a few unfortunate workers who had disappeared into the fog and beyond their sight. Unseen, a ninja K them slowly, letting Tazuna's guards relish the pained screams, just to make his job interesting. The hair on the back of Naruto's N was on end, and he felt his hand grasp a kunai from his leg holster, wondering why they had left Gaara behind. Gaara hadn't gotten very far. He was passing through a wooded area not far from Tazuna's home when he noticed something out of place. He detached his chakra-glued feet from the tree branch he had been balanced on, and leapt back to the ground. The forest floor was littered with countless types of colorful plants that Gaara was certain Haku could name with ease and an explanation if he were there, but between a nettle of glossy ferns was a curious object roughly the size of a dog. It was the smell too, he noticed. It was It had been for a short while. Bracken-colored and toppled over onto its side was a small wild pig. It was bare around the tea and gut. Now Gaara was certainly no tracker, but from the looks of the bent foliage and the tracks that seemed oddly bipedal all around, the boar appeared to be the victim of a human rather than a natural predator. Sand scooped the animal up a bit and he gave it a closer look, holding his breath because of the unbearable smell. Flies lined up along the gashes, clearly from a blade of sorts. They were deep lacerations. He stepped away and set it down again, glancing over the two-footed trail that led away from the sea and in the opposite direction that he had been heading in. Sword wounds. He surmised, someone was bored and felt like a pig on the way out here. Pathetic. If it were him, he would have chosen something more impressive, like a bear or a wolf or something that may have attacked him first and could defend itself. The question was a person, possibly 2 or 3, wielding a sword was heading south, but to what point and purpose? Immediately his brain supplied an answer: other hitmen. They weren't Zabuza, but they were still armed. If they weren't looking for Tazuna, then they were looking for the next best thing. Gaara had vanished in a whirlwind of sand after drawing his conclusion. Inari. Tsunami poked her head out of the side door. Her son had said he would be busy that morning, of course he'd still have to have breakfast first, she reasoned. Frowning when no answer came, she stepped outside, taking in the fresh air as she made her way down to a nearby dock. Inari. Tsunami called again and he looked up. He had been fiddling with the kunai that Naruto had bestowed upon him the night before. He put it out of sight as he watched his mother come up to him. He was considerate enough to understand she wouldn't appreciate him playing with knives. The walk wasn't long but she took her time, savoring the breeze. Tsunami paused a few feet away from her son who looked to be lost in thought. Inari, come inside and get some breakfast. She watched as he stared at the waves and then nodded to her. Inari stood up and paused, again drawing her attention. Mom. Yes, those ninja who went with Grandpa, there. He searched for a description. Not so bad. No, in fact they're quite honorable. She smiled down at him. I told you they were nice people. He nodded again, more enthusiastically. The smile vanished from his face when someone came up from behind his mother and seized her roughly. She restrained herself from yelping because the last thing she wanted was to alarm her son. Her hands flew up to the blade that was level with her tea and she stared at Inari, her eyes screaming at him to flee. So this is the bridge builder's family, eh? Not very impressive if you ask me. Another thug spoke from behind his counterpart. Tsunami struggled, a low, feral growl rising from her tea as the second thug closed in on Inari. Let her go. Inari howled, immediately brandishing his knife, and his mother's eyes widened. She looked slightly grateful for the gesture. His mother's captor chuckled at him. You little runt. Put that away before you hurt yourself. I'm warning you. Let my mom go. No, Inari. Go find your grandpa and tell him what's happening. I'll be alright, just run. Inari felt his knees shake as he took a few short steps and was intercepted by the second smirking hit man. Where are you going, kiddo? Your mommy's in a spot of trouble right now, you know. He didn't think when he hurled the kunai, missing his mother by inches, and felt his breath hitch in surprise when it sunk into the thigh of her captor. Tsunami took advantage of the distraction to bite his forearm, and plunged her elbow into his gut, leaping away when he loosened his grip. She threw her arms around her son protectively, glaring like a wildcat. The two thugs were clearly taken aback. Inari watched them, shaking, suddenly wishing he had another kunai so he could continue to fight. The man with the sword extracted the kunai and tossed it aside with a clatter. You'll pay for that, kid. Now they both had swords drawn and he briefly wondered how their luck could be so bad so early in the day. The fluid movement of the sand impacted the hit men, knocking their heads together and creating a stylish, simultaneous knockout. Gaara appeared shortly after, looming over the two unconscious figures, wearing a bored sort of expression. There was hope for breakfast yet. Are you all right? It was partially rhetorical, but the red-haired boy did his best to put some compassion into the words. It worked. Just a teeny bit. He was getting better at it. Tsunami nodded, not hiding her relieved grin. Yes. Thank you, Gaara-kun. But you should hurry and see if my father and your friends are all right. He nodded blankly and then looked down at Inari. You did well. Though I don't think Naruto should have given you a kunai without showing you how to use it first. Inari saw his point. He had no idea what to do with the darn thing, so he figured throwing it could be a place to start when there was danger. Well, he said I could practice throwing it at you. The boy admitted, and his mother looked appalled. Did he? Gaara's expression was somewhere between annoyed and amused. His sand quickly went to work, crushing the two men's arms with a sickening crack that made Inari and his mother visibly squeamish. It procured a few pained from the thugs, but they didn't stir. They shouldn't bother you now. Inari nodded dumbly as Gaara left, and Tsunami, still deeply perturbed, kicked the discarded swords off the edge of the dock and into the churning water. Inari slowly bent down, picking up the kunai that he had used, silently thanking Naruto and his friends. This looks bad. Tazuna's voice was gruff as Naruto, Haku and Anko formed a circle around him, tense and wielding either kunai or senbon. Hey, Haku-kun, could you get rid of some of this mist maybe? Naruto suggested quietly, noting his full control over all kinds of water. Haku said nothing, and with a small blast of chakra, the water molecules that had formed a thick haze all around them bent to his will and flew away. The air was clear once again, and Naruto would have sighed in relief if there hadn't been 6 water clones of the Nukenon surrounding them with swords raised. 2 of the water clones each received a flawlessly aimed senbon to the eyes, destroying them instantly. Tazuna looked around wildly, wondering how it could happen so fast. Haku stood in front of him, and Naruto leapt out at the water clones seconds after Anko had. It was more chaotic without Gaara, Naruto realized while dodging a sword swipe. The redhead could have destroyed all of the water clones at once with his sand. It also put more pressure on Haku, who was currently defending the bridge builder, a duty clearly not well suited for someone without a sand shield. There was a shout, and Naruto's head whipped around as Haku was propelled backwards by the dull edge of Zabuza's blade. He watched as the black-haired boy crumpled to the ground, trying to regain his breath. This left quite the dilemma, as Anko was too busy tangling with another water clone ensnared by her shadow snakes. Back off, bastard. The words left the blonde's mouth before he could stop himself, and the mist shinobi turned, abandoning Haku and targeting the bridge builder. Naruto quickly formed 2 shadow clones and leapt. Tazuna stood motionless, helpless without Haku. The clones reached him first, each grabbing one of Zabuza's arms in an effort to restrain him, weaklings. The clones howled as they were thrown off and destroyed, and the Nukenon turned again to the old man, eyes crazed. Tazuna looked on in shock as the blade stopped short of him and Zabuza's eyes narrowed, glowering down at the short ninja who had gotten in his way. Naruto wore a triumphant grin. His considerably smaller kunai fending off against the looming Zanbato, which had made a clean, shallow S from his left shoulder and proceeded down his C until the kunai prohibited any more leverage. Hey, old man, just go already. Naruto ground out through clenched teeth while glaring at Zabuza. Haku-kun won't let anything happen to you. Remarkably, the bridge builder stumbled back towards the other young genin nearby, still staring as Naruto's shoulders shook from the strain of deflecting the huge sword. Zabuza didn't seem impressed with the boy's strength. Naruto, get over here. Anko's order was see off as the water clone she was preoccupied with nearly landed a fatal blow. B dripped slowly off of his orange jacket. That old man, he has a lot of important things to do. Naruto spat as the Nukenon withdrew his stained blade. I'm not gonna let you K him because I'm going to be Hokage. And that means I can't let a like you run around and do whatever you want. Naruto-kun. Haku stood in front of Tazuna, throwing senbon which bounced pathetically off of the missing nin's Zanbato. You can't be Hokage if you're S. Zabuza said simply, raising his sword over his head and swung downward again. Gaara's sand swarmed around the blade before moving on to crush Zabuza, who promptly leapt back to avoid it. Naruto grinned as his red-haired friend appeared next to him, arms crossed, with his usual scowl plastered on his face. It was safe enough, so the blonde kneeled down to rest, his arm putting pressure on his gaping wound. Gaara, you've got to stop sleeping in. Shut up. His sand collected around Naruto and Tazuna in weight, and somewhere behind him there was a pleased whoop as Anko finished off the last of the pesky water clones. The real Zabuza didn't give any indication that Gaara's arrival made a difference. How bad is it? Naruto looked up at Gaara, frowning. How should I know, bastard? It's ba lot, so I'd say it can't be good, huh? I would have liked to have see you in too, boy, Zabuza sneered. This won't take much longer. Haku had somehow gotten behind him, senbon out, and had hit a few of the Nukanen's pressure points before he rounded on the genin with a snarl. Anko was beside Tazuna, and before she could protest, Haku continued to drive the Mist Ninja back. Suten, Water Dragon Blast. A current rose up from the side of the bridge and plunged down, just barely missing Zabuza as he avoided the strike. Haku couldn't exactly pinpoint where his aggression was coming from, but he didn't have much time to think about it. This person cares for no one but himself. He threw many more senbon, missing any and all vital points, and it seemed Zabuza was entertained, dancing around Haku's frenzied attacks as if he were playing a child's game. Now is my chance. Haku did his best to clear his head and quickly formed hand seals he had memorized the day before. The water that had drenched half of the bridge was at Zabuza's feet. It didn't take much chakra to mold the once amorphous water into sheets of ice. Haku, being the Academy-proclaimed genius that he was, wouldn't have dreamed of using such an underdeveloped ability without a plan. His chakra permitted the creation of 8 mirrors, 7 encircling the Mist Shinobi and 1 positioned above the rest. He quickly re-examined the strategy he had developed in his head from the night before, more like thinking feverishly instead of sleeping to devise some feasible plan, while he ran at Zabuza, who still stood at the center of the ring of mirrors, not in the least threatened. Anko stared, mouth agape, but caught herself after a moment and smirked. I guess Naruto really didn't hit his head. Naruto and Gaara were impressed by the memorable feat, however it was uncertain whether Haku's new technique would work. Haku dove into the nearest mirror, and Zabuza's reaction was almost quizzical. A calculating glare quickly returned to his face. Haku was admittedly frustrated as he prepared to throw a flurry of senbon at the missing nin once he began to laugh. Even an enemy should be cautious of such a unique skill, but Zabuza was clearly the exception. You're not like those other Hyoten ninja, the Nukanen said after ending his deranged chortling. It seems you have discovered something they haven't, although you may never see their techniques for yourself either. He paused. You're going to need to do better than this. Kick his a Haku. Naruto barked, fed up with the arrogant Mist Ninja. He didn't need to be told twice. Haku dove in and out of the mirrors, just shy of light speed, while launching round after round of senbon. Zabuza could clearly not evade all of the projectiles, and there were grunts of pain as a number of the needles lined the back of his en as Haku aimed for critical points. Though the speed of his movements was downright near impossible to follow, Haku felt his chakra wane just to keep the mirrors levitating, let alone to stay in shape. And it seemed that Zabuza had noticed an error in Haku's assaults after only a short time. Haku was moving so quickly that he had no way to avoid the Zanbato that had inexplicably been raised to interfere with his projected path. He dodged away to his right, hoping to enter another mirror when he was stopped with a jolt that jarred his bones. Zabuza had effortlessly caught Haku by the scruff of his GI, similar in appearance to a helpless kitten. Still wild with adrenaline, the dark-haired boy twisted around and plunged the remainder of his senbon into the Nukanen's arm, striking a few weak points. He expected to be thrown aside, or maybe even beheaded, but Haku couldn't force down the rising apprehension in his stomach as the Zanbato came around in full swing, each mirror he had created as if they were made from the most flimsy of glass. The young ninja began to struggle as the rough hand closed around the back of his en, poised to snap it with the least bit of effort. Although the thought did cross his mind where that strange chakra he was sensing was coming from. Haku's peripheral vision detected the flash of visible, red chakra that collided with the back of Zabuza's head and sent him and the Nukanen crashing to the ground. Haku regained his feet, wondering how Naruto had gotten so strong, or why he wasn't resting when he was suffering from such a large wound. Except, there was no wound, he noticed upon further inspection. B was indeed splattered all over his orange jumpsuit, but the gash that was once hemorrhaging a few minutes before was completely gone. And then it occurred to him, this is the Kyuubi's chakra, isn't it? It was odd, he thought, how he hadn't noticed Naruto's feral appearance sooner. Haku was suddenly wondering what the outcome of the battle would be as Naruto continued on ahead and Zabuza found his footing again, and could only fend off the blonde's enormous strength with his Zanbato. Anko felt a chill drip down her spine. She hadn't expected Naruto to be able to tap into the demon's chakra. Was his seal broken somehow? And what about? She glanced over at Gaara, who looked appropriately enraged, but nothing in the way relating to the Shukaku's chakra exploding out of him. Somehow she was able to relax a bit. Anko stood close to Tazuna, wielding 2 kunai. Naruto landed another Kyuubi-powered punch at Zabuza, clipping the Nukanen's head again and sending him back a considerable distance. Haku was dizzy, apparently suffering from a major loss of chakra. He still had his senbon out, although from the look of it he only had a few more to spare. What was for certain was that he was no longer in fighting condition. Surely Gaara and Naruto would pull up the S. It looked like Naruto was coming back to his senses, human ones at least, as he stumbled around the Nukanen who continued to swing his Zanbato ruthlessly. He had made another water clone too, which Haku spotted in dread as it came up from behind Naruto but was promptly crushed by Gaara's sand. Naruto finally leapt back after another dozen of his shadow clones were demolished, letting Gaara try his luck against the missing Nin. The redhead and his sand paused abruptly as Zabuza turned with a snarl, directing his attention to the opposite end of the unfinished bridge. Short attention span maybe. Naruto pondered before realizing that Zabuza had lost all incentive to fight, just because there was someone watching him a short distance away. Wait a minute. There was a balding, short man on the far side of the bridge, smirking as he watched the young Leaf Genin try to overpower Zabuza. Behind him stood a large crowd of hired thugs and bandits that were also amused by the ninja battle. They had only just arrived and the mist shinobi wasn't pleased by their presence in the slightest. I told you no distractions, Zabuza said gruffly, near authoritatively, I'm working. That may be so, Gato sneered, less fearful of the Nukanen when he had a mob of thugs behind him, but you've exhausted my patience, Zabuza. You aren't reliable. Your services are no longer required. Naruto stood beside Haku, wearing a dumbfounded look. That little wind bag is Gato. You've got to be kidding me. Gato's smirk widened as Zabuza lowered his Zanbato, eyes again calculating. I see you've found your interesting prospect, but I'm afraid we'll have to see this short. To be fair, before we KU we'll peel the kid's face off and let you keep it as a. He snorted, token of my appreciation. Zabuza wasn't affected by the shipping magnate's double cross. In fact, he had been counting on it. His eyes shifted to Haku who was nearest and then to Gaara and Naruto a short distance away. Kid, he was speaking at Haku, looks like the old man's off the hook, since I'm not getting paid. Naruto's eyes narrowed, greedy bastard. Here's a chance to prove yourself. Haku looked alarmed and it only made Zabuza smirk beneath the bandages concealing his face. A true possessor of the Hyoten can easily eliminate twice this many men. His full glare rested on Haku and the boy felt even more jumpy. Now show me. Zabuza, you really are pitiful, Gato declared and there were numerous shouts of agreement from behind him. This child, us. It seems I was right about you. He then looked to Anko. I didn't plan for other shinobi to interfere, but no matter, this land belongs to me now. Naruto shifted nervously, wondering how the Nukanen could so suddenly become cooperative when he had been trying to K them all minutes before. Haku stared ahead and thought, should I do it? He weighed the circumstances quickly in his head. It wasn't as if he had anything to prove to the treacherous Mist Nin, but maybe he should at least try to measure up to his clan's standards. What clan? His mind supplied dryly, but I could do it. These people serve Gato, the one person who is responsible for this village's suffering. I can K them. I should. But I've never. While Haku was still deliberating whether he was emotionally ready to K, no matter how noble the cause, Naruto's panicked shout snapped him back to the physical realm. Gaara, don't. The blonde warned, in a futile attempt as sand encircled the crowd at the end of the bridge with astonishing speed. Haku saw the red-haired boy's face contorted in an expression of pure hatred, animal-like, and his eyes were completely blank. He ignored Naruto, raising his arms and listening intently as the thugs tensed, raised weapons, and did their best not to become unnerved by such a strange ability. It was odd, Haku thought, that Gaara had nothing to prove, but also nothing to keep him from taking lives. He had done it before. It was impossible to say what Zabuza was thinking as he watched sand envelope half of the group and implode all at once, leaving the remainder of the thugs to scramble in an effort to avoid the billowing, cloud of death swirling around them. Anko didn't move. Their client had shut his eyes, sickened. Haku and Naruto shielded their faces as rained with the pitter-patter sound that authentic rain would make. His friends stopped calling out to him. If someone had planned to end Gato's tyranny, at least he would get the job done quickly. Tazuna turned and saw a crowd of familiar faces behind them. Grandpa, we're here to help. Inari crowed, oblivious to the Gaara was initiating at the moment. There were enthused cries behind the boy from their fellow villagers, and Tazuna felt his heart leap into his tea, witnessing a revolution. It took a long moment for Naruto's brain to register how quickly Gaara had crushed the second half of the crowd, seeing that there wasn't enough sand to kill them all at once. Ruby drops dotted his face like freckles when it was over, and he looked to Haku, who had dropped his senbon. Unfortunately, it wasn't over. There was a single survivor that hadn't met his end quite yet. Gato tripped over his own feet, falling to the damp concrete of the bridge, whimpering like a cornered dog. Gaara's face was expressionless, and that relieved Haku to a degree. The villagers, including Inari, looked on with little understanding of what was happening. Sand slowly coiled around the last criminal, who was sobbing uncontrollably, and Haku wondered why he suddenly felt pity for someone as despicable as him. Maybe it was because Gaara didn't mind K. This land belongs to no one. Gaara's voice was not his own. Anyone who tries to conquer others and control them should always expect to fail. Enlightenment flickered in Gato's eyes for less than a second. Sand burial. Zabuza slung his Zanbato on his back with a satisfied look. Who knew there was such a capable K among them? And one that slept in late that morning too. Naruto wondered how he prevented himself from vomiting. He didn't want Gaara to take offense. Or possibly because his body simply had no energy left for such a trivial function. The mist ninja turned, not bothered. His glare rested on Haku expectantly, who refused to raise his eyes from the ground. You will prove yourself to me. Haku. The dark-haired boy felt his name equivalent to a curse when Zabuza spoke it. You already know where to find me. He disappeared, and Haku exhaled a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. It was over. There were crazed cheers from the villagers, and Naruto fell to his butt in exhaustion, muttering something about ramen and a nice, long nap. Gaara's sand slipped back into his gourd, soaked in the bee of his enemies. His face belied some alarm over his actions. Anko clapped Tazuna on the back cheerfully, before seeing to Gaara, approaching him with the utmost caution. Haku dragged his feet over to Naruto, plopping down beside him and immediately setting to work on examining the blonde. Naruto-kun, you were injured, weren't you? It felt odd that Haku had to confirm it. The blonde shrugged and then grinned. I guess it's that old fox. I saw the no-eyebrow clown grab you and well. He scratched his head. It gets kinda fuzzy after that, but I felt like $1,000,000. All healed up and energized. I'll take your word for it. Haku sighed, wiping sweat out of his eyes. Naruto's grin widened, sheepishly. Hey, the fox demon may scare the hell out of people, but it sure has its perks. Haku managed his first genuine smile of the day. Oh, if only Ero-sensei were here. Naruto mused. Inari raced up to his grandfather with a small crossbow he had borrowed from a neighbor. Hey grandpa. Are you okay? The old man looked down at him and nodded, still trying to recover from all that had transpired. He was alive and in one piece thanks to the leaf ninja. There was finally hope for his village now that they were free of Gato. The bridge's construction would continue. You brought most of the village with you, I see, Tazuna chuckled, patting his head. Good thinking. We were worried about you guys. Inari smiled at Naruto nearby, who was wobbling to his feet. I guess you could handle things without us though. I can't say I'm surprised that Zabuza ran off like that. He's still a wanted criminal, Anko pointed out to the bridge builder. I think you can relax though. Clearly that freak has no interest in you anymore. I'm glad. Tazuna sighed heavily before turning to Gaara, who seemed unsociable at the present time. I must thank you and your friends. You're responsible for avenging Kaiser and restoring hope to our village. Haku and Naruto grinned at the praise and Gaara remained quiet. Is there any way we can repay you? Not in the way of money. Anko thought blandly. Naruto beamed. Well, you see we are a bit hungry. The bridge was completed in roughly 2 days and Team 2 were the first to cross it back to the mainland. Tazuna, Tsunami, Inari and a good portion of the village had come to see him off. Take care on your journey back. Tazuna said, looking much happier than he had a few days earlier. Quit worrying about us, you old coot. You just make sure you get a ton of business through these parts and fix this place up, alright? Anko grinned, finding that the mission was a total success and that the genin were responsible for it. We will, thanks to you. Tsunami was smiling widely, like her son who stood in front of her. Gaara and Haku were eager to return home, but Naruto still had one last question on his mind. Hey, what are you guys gonna call this bridge? Inari looked at him for a moment and then laughed. Well, I thought we'd call it the Great Naruto Bridge. Haku looked a bit flustered. What about Gaara-kun and I? Don't we receive credit for all our toils? Gaara didn't seem very much bothered about it. The boy shrugged. You get credit, but we can't give it too many names. I'm sure you understand. Yeah, my name sounds cooler anyway. Naruto nodded, pleased with Inari's decision. The next day the team had arrived back in Konoha, dirty, hungry and downright exhausted. Anko congratulated them and was ready to turn in the mission report. You maggots did well for your first C rank. Actually, you pretty much crushed it considering you're still amateurs. She found it difficult to call Gaara an amateur after witnessing his capabilities on the battlefield, but I'm sure you understand that I'd rather not wait around for your master, on behalf of my sanity. Yeah, we do, Naruto agreed, scratching the side of his head. You were way better than him anyway if you ask me. The legendary three are not to be underestimated, Naruto, and eventually. A dark look came over her face. You'll learn why. Is there anything we can do for you before you go, Anko-sensei? Haku would be polite until the very end. Anko looked thoughtful. Well, I'd have you buy me all the dango you could afford, but sadly, I have a mission debriefing to give the Hokage. Later, boys. She stalked down the street, her overcoat swaying slowly in the light breeze. Naruto slipped the bag off of his shoulders and stretched his arms over his head, with a yawn loud enough to wake the S. Gaara stood next to them silently. He had scarcely said a word on the return journey, not that he usually had much to say at all. The mission had altered his behavior and hopefully it was only a temporary side effect. Let's ditch this crap back at home and then get something to eat. Naruto decided loudly, grabbing his bag and taking off without an answer. Haku scurried after him, begging him to slow down before his feet were eroded away to nothing. Gaara followed a fair distance behind them with only half a mind. At noon, Team 2 was bathed and redressed, settling down at Ichiraku Ramen for lunch, when a familiar, aged face trudged up the sidewalk looking utterly defeated. Ah, Ero-sensei, they let you out of jail already. Anko-sensei was way cooler. Naruto smirked, and watched as the toad hermit dejectedly took a seat between Gaara and Haku. I was never in jail, I got booked at headquarters. Jiraiya muttered, but it would have been preferable. Naruto chuckled maniacally. Ooh, someone's moody. The statement captured Gaara's attention. Preferable. Jiraiya nodded and Ayami came by with Naruto, Haku and Gaara's orders. She looked at the Sennin curiously. Would you like something, Gama Sennin? I'll take whatever you got, I don't care. He mumbled. She nodded and returned to the back of the kitchen. Haku felt a small amount of worry for the Sennin, wondering what had made him so miserable. What's wrong, sensei? What's wrong? What's wrong? It's terrible, I tell you. Hokage-sama was too harsh on me this time. Oh, the complete humiliation. The Sennin wailed, burying his face in his hands. Gaara frowned. Now you're being dramatic. Naruto nodded while slurping his beef ramen. Yeah, Gaara-kun's right. Pull yourself together, you pansy. Haku chuckled but muffled himself with a sip of ginseng tea. Jiraiya frowned. It was one tiny slip-up and now my life is in total disarray. Jail is more merciful than these conditions. You stay out of prison on what conditions? What did you get? Haku prompted, knowing they were quickly losing interest. Just probation really, but it's horrible. My publisher postponed my book. 4 months. His students cringed, wondering how he would cope. Community service is also gonna eat up all my time. It's cruel. Maybe if you weren't such a lecher you wouldn't have these problems. Gaara pointed out, and his friends nodded solemnly. Ayami returned with a bowl of noodles and Jiraiya selected a pair of chopsticks from a dispenser half-heartedly after thanking her. Yeah, well, enough of your problems. We had to fight a friggin' Junin for the past 3 days. Naruto barked, finishing his ramen. Jiraiya raised his eyebrows. What are you talking about? While you were gone, Anko-sensei believed we were ready for a C rank mission, so Hokage-sama obliged us, Haku clarified, but it proved to be much more dangerous than that. Our client was targeted by Mist Shinobi and… Yeah, so what about this Junin? The sage went straight to the point. Haku explained the story from start to finish, from the Demon Brothers, to the Hyoten, to the climactic battle on the bridge with Momoki Zabuza. Naruto would occasionally add in a detail or two while Gaara listened as he ate. Jiraiya listened quietly and narrowed his eyes during some of the more dangerous parts. When Haku had finished narrating, the Sennin spoke. I don't think I should have to tell you this, Haku, but make sure you watch your back from here on out, Jiraiya advised after a big slurp of noodles. That Nukanon Zabuza is one of 7 shinobi swordsmen of Mist. In other words, bad news for anyone associated with them. It seems he's only interested in you because of your Hyoten. But why Haku-kun? I mean, he knew about other people from his clan, so why just Haku? Naruto wondered. The Sennin thought about it. I can't say for sure, there could be many reasons. Possibly because Haku is young and, no offense kid, can still be easily manipulated, Haku didn't mind, or because this clan, Haku's clan, is not very sociable in the ways of a shinobi these days. The war had a heavy toll on the great clans of the water country, so they aren't exactly what you'd call ninja friendly. I'm glad for that, Haku said quietly. Well, I don't want what's left of my family to be involved in these things, even if I'll never get to meet them. Naruto patted his back soothingly and Gaara offered him a sympathetic look. Jiraiya sighed, feeling the boy's pain, and then turned to the blonde. Oh, and Naruto, it's upsetting to hear that not once have you summoned anything during that mission. What were you waiting for? An invitation? Naruto had begun work on his 4th bowl. Oh, well, not really, he chuckled. I guess it never really crossed my mind. Next mission, I promise. I'll call a few toads, but they aren't very good fighters anyway. Oh yeah. Jiraiya was defensive. Well, maybe if you practiced more often you'd actually do something worthwhile with your summoning. Honor that contract I gave you. Why do you care so much, old man? Naruto snorted, just to test his patience, but was also curious. Jiraiya was about to snap out an answer, but thought better of it. Just practice, will you? Naruto nodded. Sure, just chill out, Ero-sensei. You make it sound like I've never gotten around to summoning Gamabunta or something. Gaara and Haku smirked at Jiraiya's stunned face. After composing himself, the Sennin managed to ask with some aplomb, so, you have summoned the Toad Boss after all. How did he take to you the first time? Naruto shrugged. He only tried to K me. It wasn't so bad. What was the outcome of your mission today? Hinata looked up with an expression similar to a deer being caught in the headlights. She sat quietly next to her sister and across from her father at a small, mahogany table, sipping tea with her head bowed. The shy girl had been desperately hoping her father wouldn't pay her any attention at all, but how could he not after the Hyuga clan heir had returned from her first C-rank mission? She swallowed. It was a success, father. Hanabi raised an eyebrow imperceptibly, trying to disguise her astonishment as interest. Her elder sister was well known for her absurdly gentle ways, and many of her D-rank missions had poor results that only tarnished the Hyuga name. Hiashi said nothing else, and Hinata had trouble telling if he actually cared what had transpired during her mission, so long as it was a success. It was a fact that stung her deeply. She had been training extensively ever since she had achieved Genin rank, hoping that in some insane way her father would be proud of her. However, it slowly began to dawn on her, over the years, that she had made herself a hopeless rival, none other than her cousin, Hyuga Neji. He was beyond compare in skill, and she had no hope of diverting her father's attention away from the prodigy unless she somehow became Hokage. Highly unlikely, but not impossible. Naruto-kun could give her some pointers, or if she s an honorable death while completing her mission. If the mission failed, well, her death wouldn't count as much. But whatever the case, she felt stunted, almost harassed by all of these expectations coming from her father, sister, her clan, and how could one forget the entire village, who would lose any and all respect for the most powerful clan in Konoha if, heaven forbid, she became the leader of the family. And somehow she managed to live her life without expressing these hardships to anyone, not even to her friends. It was bottled up, or rather, locked up inside of the deepest confines of her soul, because the last thing a respectful member of the Hyuga family would do is complain. She never complained because she rarely found her voice. When she did, it was quiet and polite. It made her want to scream, but that would be contradictory. Maybe Gaara-kun could help her learn how to be sarcastic and mean. Naruto-kun was also very vocal, so he could help. Though the outlook for that didn't look good. I'll find my own way to make my life worthwhile. I can still be strong, somehow. Oni-san, Hinata snapped out of her thoughts, you haven't said anything about your teammates. They say they're both young men from our fellow clans. What are they like? Hiyashi didn't appear interested and sipped his tea, while Hanabi watched her sister expectantly, wanting the dirt on any up-and-coming talent among the shinobi clans of Konoha. Hinata swallowed again, collecting her thoughts. My teammates they're be both quite strong. Her father took another sip of jasmine tea, listening with some eerie sort of detachment. Shino-kun is of the Aberrane clan. You mean those people who use insects to do their bidding? Hanabi looked slightly disgusted. A real ninja wouldn't need such tiny creatures to fight for them. Real ninjas stand on their own 2 feet. But Shino-kun does fight on his own, she protested weakly. He uses his Kikai insects most often for collecting information and for disabling his opponents. Hinata raised her eyes. I think it is very impressive. Hanabi ignored the retort. What about the other? The Hitaki. Hiyashi paused briefly while pouring himself some more tea. Hinata tried to grasp the words to form a description of him. He is unique. Sato-kun has a remarkable talent for traps and genjutsu. I have seen his chakra circulatory system with my Byakugan a few times during training, and his chakra is quite different than anything I've ever seen. It is the white chakra of the Hitaki clan, Hiyashi clarified simply, and she bowed her head sheepishly at her lack of knowledge. He, I assume, is the copy ninja's nephew. They possess an unusual white chakra that can be channeled through certain weapons. Hanabi looked intrigued, but Hinata wasn't very keen on exposing the secrets of her teammates' families. Looking into her empty teacup for a brief moment, she wished she could escape somehow, but then sat up straighter, brushing her thoughts aside. Father, may I be excused? He inclined his head slightly in what she took as an affirmative, before standing up, and silently exited the tea room. It was amazing how restless her own family made her feel, and there were times she yearned for another family that would only expect her best rather than perfection during her career as a shinobi, or even in general. She stepped lightly in the hall, passing by a few of her indirect relatives, some cousins a few times removed, and gave them a small, shy word of greeting before moving on. Hinata glanced outside an open door and saw the sun was sinking beneath the horizon in an explosion of orange and pink. It made her smile unconsciously, and she kept walking, wondering when Naruto, Gaara and Haku would return from their mission. A small chirping noise caught her attention once she turned a corner, and she looked around to see if a bird had strayed inside the compound again. Hinata saw nothing, but the soft chirping persisted, and she was grateful the hall was empty because she looked like a dam full, turning in all directions searching for the sound's origin. Absently she looked down at the hardwood floor beneath her bare feet, and her eyes widened when a tiny string of color lined up beside the wall, red and yellow. She knelt down, perplexed and awed all at once. Tiny, colorful toads had somehow infiltrated the Hyuga compound, chirping blithely with those cute, beady eyes. Immediately fearing for their lives if they stayed any longer out in the open, she followed the trail down the hall, gently lifting each minute creature and cradling them in the palm of her hand while they sang carelessly. The final toad, a bright, lemon yellow, was scooped into her palm, and she sighed in relief that she hadn't been caught by any other residents. Much to her surprise, she had reached her destination. In fact, it was suspicious that the little critters had lined up and led her down the path straight to the door of her own bedroom. Hinata opened the door quickly and went inside, shutting it behind her while her whole hand was chirping. Her room was quiet. She had activated the Byakugan just to make sure no more of the darn little things had strayed into her room and could quite possibly become victims of her own foot. Hey, Hinata-chan, what took you so long? Startled, she looked up, making sure not to drop any of her precious cargo. On her windowsill sat Naruto, looking very pleased with himself. I didn't leave that window open. Hinata thought to herself before acknowledging that he was a ninja and that infiltration was a common ability. Jay just came back from a mission, Naruto-kun. She answered quietly, setting the small, autumn-colored toads down and watched them hop across her bed like splashes of magic paint. For a long moment he balanced on the pane outside her window, looking thoughtful. She feared, irrationally however, that he could possibly fall and break his N. Please come in, Naruto-kun. Don't mind if I do. He bounced inside, grinning. It wasn't the first time he had snuck into the Hyuga estate. He actually had been doing it regularly for several years, but this was the first time he had ever laid bait for someone who lived there, namely Hyuga Hinata. She sat cautiously on the side of her bed and admired the red and yellow dots scampering across it. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her. I'm just curious, Hinata-chan, but why did you bring all those little guys with you? She blushed, answering honestly, well, I think they're sweet and I didn't want anyone to step on them. He laughed loudly and she feared he'd alert someone of the main house, or even worse, her father to his presence. There was no reaction, so she relaxed. The blonde took a seat on the floor, carpeted, because she disliked cold floors, and fiddled with a medical scroll that had been forgotten there. She frowned. She'd have to clean her room even though it was already anal retentively well kept. Hinata-chan, they can't get hurt, they're summoned. His grin widened, you worry too much. And just like that, Naruto had the tiny, chirping, spots of color disappear in many small puffs of smoke. Her heart fluttered, wondering if he intentionally wanted to make it feel romantic or if she was being ridiculous once again because of his close proximity. She'd analyze it later. Yes, I was being silly, I suppose, she admitted, wishing he had left them, but, your mission. Her voice squeaked and he chuckled at her. How did you and Gara-kun and Haku-kun do? Was it successful? Hinata paused, not liking how she sounded like her father. I mean, what happened? He stood up. See, that's why I came here. Let's get some ramen and I'll tell you how awesome it was. In a few hours her father would be expecting her at dinner and she still hadn't finished reading a scroll pertaining to advanced forms of healing jutsu that Haku had given her for her birthday. But that smile and those eyes. I'd like that, Naruto-kun. She smiled back, also standing, and followed him out the window, asking him how he had gotten those adorable toads into the mansion. Maybe her father wouldn't notice she was missing. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.